Northern France, late summer 1943. The initial encounters between the Luftwaffe and the newly arrived American Republic P-47 Thunderbolts were marked by a dismissive confidence on the German side, a strategic miscalculation rooted in visual prejudice that would ultimately prove costly. German fighter pilots, accustomed to the agile, lighter designs of their own Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf FW-190s, observed the P-47's substantial airframe and perceived it as inherently sluggish, an easy target for their more nimble machines. This early assessment, widely circulated through operational reports and pilot briefings, directly influenced tactical approaches, leading to aggressive, close-in engagements that often underestimated the P-47's true combat potential. Hauptmann Erich Schmidt, a Staffelkapitän with Jagdgeschwader zu Richthofen, articulated this prevailing sentiment in his combat log following a mid-August skirmish over the Seine. His entry noted the clumsy appearance of the American fighter, likening its bulk to a flying brick, a descriptor that quickly gained currency among his peers. The P-47's empty weight of 10,000 pounds, nearly double that of a Bf-109 G6, reinforced this perception of an unmaneuverable behemoth, seemingly ill-suited for dogfighting. The Thunderbolt's radial engine, a Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp, further contributed to this visual impression of mass. Its large frontal area, necessitated by the twin-row 18-cylinder configuration, gave the aircraft a blunt, almost ponderous look compared to the sleek, inline-engined German fighters. This engine, however, was capable of generating 2,000 horsepower, a figure that far exceeded the output of contemporary German power plants. But its sheer size initially overshadowed its performance implications in the minds of German observers. Damage reports from early engagements, while sparse, often noted the P-47's ability to absorb significant punishment and continue flying, an attribute that bewildered German pilots who expected quick kills against such a seemingly unwieldy opponent. The aircraft's robust construction, particularly its heavy-gauge aluminum skin and extensive internal armor plating around the cockpit and engine, contributed to this surprising resilience. These structural redundancies were not immediately apparent from a distance, reinforcing the superficial judgment based solely on its dimensions. The prevailing tactical doctrine within the Luftwaffe, emphasizing speed and maneuverability for decisive engagements, found little to admire in the P-47's initial presentation. German pilots were trained to exploit perceived weaknesses in enemy aircraft, and the Thunderbolt's apparent lack of agility was seen as its most glaring vulnerability. This early collective misjudgment would shape the initial phase of air combat over the Western Front, influencing both German confidence and the evolving American tactics. The P-47 Thunderbolt emerged from a design philosophy rooted in a grim understanding of aerial combat over Europe. Republic Aviation's chief designer, Alexander Cardvelli, envisioned a fighter that could absorb significant battle damage and still return its pilot home. A stark contrast to the lighter, more agile interceptors that dominated early war skies. This emphasis on survivability directly informed every major structural decision. Beginning with its massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp radial engine. This engine, a behemoth of 18 cylinders arranged in 2 rows, produced an initial 2,000 horsepower, a figure that would climb with successive models. Its sheer size necessitated a large, deep fuselage, which in turn provided ample space for internal fuel tanks and the extensive ducting required for the turbo-supercharger system. The turbo-supercharger, positioned in the rear fuselage, was a critical component for high-altitude performance, but its complex plumbing added considerable weight and structural requirements, further contributing to the aircraft's robust frame. Damage reports from early engagements with German fighters, documented in Allied intelligence summaries, frequently noted the P-47's ability to sustain hits that would cripple lesser aircraft. This resilience was not accidental, it was engineered. The wing spars, for instance, were exceptionally thick and constructed from high-strength aluminum alloys, designed to withstand not only combat stresses, but also the immense G-forces generated during high-speed dives. The skin plating itself was often thicker than that found on contemporary fighters, particularly around critical areas like the engine cowling and cockpit. The armament, a defining characteristic, comprised 8 Browning AN M2.50 caliber machine guns, 4 mounted in each wing. Each gun carried between 300 and 445 rounds, depending on its position, totaling over 2,800 rounds of ammunition. This concentration of heavy machine gun fire delivered a devastating punch, capable of shredding the light alloy construction of most Axis aircraft. The decision to forego cannons, which were heavier and carried fewer rounds, in favor of a high volume of .50 caliber fire was a deliberate choice to maximize the probability of hits and inflict catastrophic damage. Production logs from Republic Aviation's Farmingdale plant show a consistent material usage rate that dwarfed that of other single-engine fighters. A typical P-47D, for example, consumed approximately 1,800 kilograms of aluminum alloy, 200 kilograms of steel, and 150 kilograms of various other metals. This material expenditure translated directly into a finished airframe that weighed over 4,500 kilograms empty, making it one of the heaviest single-engine fighters of the war. Its weight, initially perceived as a disadvantage by some pilots, became a cornerstone of its legendary durability. The strategic implication of such a design was profound. The P-47 could absorb punishment, deliver a heavy blow, and operate effectively at high altitudes, making it an ideal escort fighter for bomber formations deep into enemy territory. Its ability to return pilots to base, even with significant damage, boosted morale and preserved invaluable trained aircrew. This trade-off of agility for durability and firepower was a calculated gamble that ultimately paid dividends in the attritional air war over Europe. The early encounters over the Reich and occupied territories often began with a familiar pattern of miscalculation. German pilots, accustomed to the agile, lightly armored British and American fighters, initially approached the P-47 Thunderbolt with a confidence born of experience against different adversaries. They observed its bulk, its seemingly ponderous airframe, and concluded it was a slow, vulnerable target, ripe for easy pickings in the swirling chaos of a dogfight. This initial assessment, however, failed to account for the P-47's unique design philosophy and its formidable, if less obvious, strengths. Interrogation files from captured Luftwaffe pilots frequently recount early engagements where Bf-109s or FW-190s would attempt to turn inside the P-47, a standard tactic against less robust aircraft. The German fighters, with their superior climb rates and tighter turning circles at medium altitudes, expected to gain positional advantage quickly. They anticipated the P-47 would struggle to respond, forcing it into a defensive posture or presenting an easy shot. This assumption, however, overlooked the Thunderbolt's exceptional diving performance and its structural integrity, which allowed it to reach speeds that would tear the wings off lighter aircraft. Damage reports from these early sorties reveal a consistent pattern. German pilots would commit to close-range maneuvering, only to find the P-47 accelerating away in a dive, often leaving them behind. The P-47, with its heavy construction and powerful Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engine, could achieve dive speeds exceeding 550 miles per hour, a velocity that placed immense strain on the airframes of its German counterparts. This unexpected speed in the vertical plane often allowed the Thunderbolt to disengage or, more critically, to reverse roles and gain an energy advantage. Production logs illustrate the disparity in design philosophy. A typical Bf-109 G6, for instance, weighed approximately 6,900 pounds, fully loaded, emphasizing speed and agility through lightweight construction. The P-47D, by contrast, often exceeded 14,000 pounds, a mass dictated by its formidable engine, robust airframe, and extensive armament. This weight, initially perceived as a weakness by German pilots, was in fact integral to its ability to absorb damage and perform high-speed maneuvers without structural failure, a characteristic that quickly became apparent in combat. The strategic implication of these early encounters was significant. The Luftwaffe's initial underestimation of the P-47 led to a revised tactical doctrine for engaging the American fighter. Pilots were instructed to avoid protracted turning fights and instead exploit their superior climb rates to attack from above, or to engage in hit-and-run tactics rather than sustained close combat. This shift acknowledged the P-47's resilience and its devastating firepower, moving away from the assumption that its bulk equated to vulnerability. The skies above Europe began to witness a new kind of aerial combat, where brute force met agile precision, and initial assumptions were often paid for in aircraft and lives. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, in the early days of its European deployment, often drew derisive German appellations, flying brick being among the more common, a testament to its robust airframe and perceived lack of agility in comparison to the lighter, more nimble Focke-Wulf FW-190 and Messerschmitt Bf-109. This initial assessment, however, frequently overlooked the formidable offensive punch the aircraft carried, a capability that would profoundly reshape air-to-air combat dynamics and ground attack effectiveness. The P-47 was designed from its inception with a heavy emphasis on firepower, a direct response to early war experiences that demonstrated the need for overwhelming destructive potential against increasingly armored enemy aircraft. At the heart of this destructive capability lay its armament, 8 Browning ANM2 .50 caliber machine guns, 4 mounted in each wing. These were not merely standard infantry weapons adapted for aerial use. The ANM2 was a purpose-built aircraft variant featuring a lighter barrel and higher rate of fire than its ground-based counterparts. Each gun was capable of expelling approximately 750 to 850 rounds per minute, translating to a combined theoretical output of nearly 6,800 rounds per minute from a single P-47. This torrent of lead, often comprising a mix of armor-piercing, incendiary, and tracer rounds, created a dense cone of fire designed to saturate an enemy airframe. The ammunition load for these guns was substantial, with typical configurations allowing for 350 rounds per inner gun and 260 rounds per outer gun, totaling 2,440 rounds per aircraft. This generous supply meant a P-47 pilot could sustain bursts of fire far longer than many of their adversaries, who often carried fewer guns or smaller caliber weapons with limited ammunition. For instance, the FW-190A8, a contemporary German fighter, typically mounted 2 13mm MG-131 machine guns and 4 20mm MG-151-20 cannons, offering a higher explosive potential but a significantly lower overall projectile count. The sheer volume of .50 caliber rounds, while not always delivering immediate explosive impact, generated a cumulative effect that could shred control surfaces, rupture fuel lines, and disable engines with relentless efficiency. Damage reports from downed German aircraft frequently detailed extensive structural damage, often described as riddled or perforated, rather than cleanly struck. This pattern was indicative of the P-47's concentrated fire. A single .50 caliber round possessed sufficient kinetic energy to penetrate light armor and critical components, And when dozens or even hundreds struck a target within seconds, the results were often catastrophic. The psychological impact on German pilots was also profound. Encountering a P-47 meant facing a wall of projectiles that few aircraft could withstand for long. The efficacy of this armament extended beyond air-to-air engagements. As the war progressed, the P-47 increasingly found itself in the ground attack role, where its robust construction and heavy firepower proved invaluable. Strafing runs against trains, convoys, and troop concentrations were devastating. The .50 caliber rounds capable of piercing light armored vehicles and disrupting logistics with ease. The sustained fire capability meant that multiple passes or extended strafing runs could be executed without immediate concern for exhausting ammunition, allowing pilots to press attacks with greater confidence. This adaptability transformed the flying brick from a perceived aerial slug into a versatile and feared weapon system, its true nature revealed not by its silhouette, but by the destructive power it unleashed. The initial dismissals of the P-47, often characterized as a flying brick by some Luftwaffe pilots, began to yield to a grudging respect, then to a stark apprehension. Early encounters, particularly those at higher altitudes where the Thunderbolt's turbo supercharger granted it parity or even superiority, often ended with German pilots reporting an astonishing resilience in the American fighter. Damage reports from downed or returning German aircraft frequently noted the P-47's ability to sustain hits that would cripple or destroy other single-engine fighters, a characteristic initially attributed to luck or poor marksmanship. Analysis of recovered P-47 airframes, particularly those forced down largely intact, revealed the structural philosophy behind this durability. The airframe, especially around the cockpit and engine, was heavily armored. Utilizing thick duralumin plating, the engine itself, a Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp, was a massive, air-cooled radial, its 18 cylinders presenting a dense, almost impenetrable barrier to incoming rounds from the front. This inherent robustness, combined with self-sealing fuel tanks and redundant control systems, meant that a P-47 could absorb punishment and continue fighting, or at least return to base. Quantitative data from Luftwaffe intelligence summaries, compiled from pilot debriefings and wreckage examinations, gradually illuminated the true nature of the threat. For instance, a report from Jagdgeschwader 26 in late 1943 detailed an engagement where a single P-47 sustained over 20 hits from 20mm cannon fire and numerous 13mm machine gun rounds, yet continued to engage before eventually disengaging and flying away. This contrasted sharply with the vulnerability of the Bf-109 or FW-190, where a similar volume of damage often proved catastrophic, particularly to their liquid-cooled engines or less protected cockpits. The strategic implication of this realization was profound. German pilots could no longer rely on quick, decisive hits to neutralize the P-47. Instead, engagements against Thunderbolts demanded sustained fire, often requiring multiple passes and a significant expenditure of ammunition to achieve a kill. This shifted tactics from opportunistic strikes to more deliberate, often prolonged, dogfights, increasing the risk to German pilots and aircraft. The P-47 was not merely a target, it was a formidable adversary that required a fundamental reevaluation of combat doctrine. The shift in perception was complete when German pilots began to experience the full impact of the P-47's offensive armament. The 8.50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns, each firing at a rate of 750 to 850 rounds per minute, delivered a devastating concentration of fire. When these weapons found their mark, the effect on German aircraft was often instantaneous and catastrophic, transforming initial flying brick derision into a grim acknowledgement of a truly lethal opponent. The adaptation of Allied tactics to the P-47's inherent strengths was not immediate, but a gradual realization born from combat experience and the analysis of engagement reports. Early P-47 pilots, accustomed to lighter, more agile fighters, often attempted to dogfight with the Luftwaffe, a strategy that frequently ended poorly for the Thunderbolt given its substantial mass and lower maneuverability at slower speeds. The aircraft's true potential lay not in turning circles, but in its ability to convert altitude into speed and then leverage that speed for decisive strikes. This understanding led to the widespread adoption of the boom and zoom tactic, a strategy perfectly suited to the P-47's robust airframe and powerful engine. Pilots would climb to a high altitude, often above 25,000 feet, where the supercharged R-2800 engine performed optimally. From this commanding position, they would dive on enemy aircraft or ground targets, building immense speed, unleash their formidable armament, and then use that speed to climb back to altitude, disengaging before the enemy could effectively respond. Damage reports from early 1944 consistently showed P-47s returning with battle damage primarily to their wings and tail, indicating they were often hit during the pull-out phase of a dive, rather than in protracted turning engagements. The Thunderbolt's exceptional dive speed, often exceeding 500 miles per hour, and its ability to withstand high G-forces during recovery made it uniquely effective in this role. The sheer kinetic energy of a diving P-47, coupled with the concentrated fire of its 8.50 caliber machine guns, could tear apart even heavily armored German fighters like the Focke-Wulf FW-190 in a single pass. Production logs from Republic Aviation indicate that by late 1943, the structural integrity of the P-47's wing spars and fuselage was being continuously refined, allowing for even greater stress tolerances during high-speed maneuvers. Beyond air-to-air combat, the P-47's rugged construction and impressive ordnance-carrying capacity quickly marked it as an outstanding ground attack aircraft. Initial ground support missions were often opportunistic, but as the war progressed, dedicated strafing and bombing runs became a primary function. A typical P-47D could carry 2 1,000-pound bombs or 10 5-inch rockets, in addition to its machine guns, transforming it into a potent flying artillery platform. Unit diaries from the 9th Air Force in the spring of 1944 frequently describe P-47s providing close air support, disrupting German logistics, and interdicting troop movements with devastating effect. The strategic implication of this tactical evolution was profound. The P-47, initially viewed by some as a heavy, somewhat clumsy fighter, transformed into a versatile weapon system capable of both air superiority and ground interdiction. Its ability to absorb punishment and return its pilot safely, even after sustaining significant damage, fostered a deep trust among ground forces and air crews alike. This reliability, combined with its destructive power, solidified its role as a critical component of Allied air power in the European theater. The initial derision, once a common refrain in Luftwaffe debriefings, gradually gave way to a more pragmatic assessment. Early encounters had solidified the image of the P-47 as a heavy, less agile adversary compared to the nimble Focke-Wulf 190 or Messerschmitt Bf-109. This perception was often reinforced by the sight of P-47s in defensive maneuvers, their large airframes appearing ponderous against the lighter German fighters. However, the sheer resilience of the Thunderbolt began to impress itself upon German pilots through repeated engagements. Damage reports from returning German aircraft frequently noted the extraordinary number of hits required to bring down a P-47, even after sustained cannon fire. Interrogation files of captured American pilots sometimes contained accounts of their aircraft sustaining hundreds of rounds and still returning to base, a testament to its robust construction. The thick armor plating, particularly around the cockpit and engine, and the self-sealing fuel tanks, designed to withstand multiple penetrations, were key factors in this survivability. The P-47's powerful Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engine, a radial design, was inherently more tolerant of damage than inline engines, often continuing to run even after taking direct hits to individual cylinders. This structural integrity allowed P-47s to absorb punishment that would cripple or destroy other fighter types. As the war progressed and P-47s began to operate more frequently in the fighter-bomber role, their ground attack capabilities further underscored their utility. Luftwaffe ground observation reports detailed the devastating effects of the P-47's 8 50 caliber machine guns on convoys, rail lines, and troop concentrations. The concentrated firepower of these heavy machine guns, each firing at a rate of approximately 750 to 850 rounds per minute, could shred light armored vehicles and suppress anti-aircraft positions with terrifying efficiency. The P-47's ability to dive at extremely high speeds, often exceeding 500 miles per hour, also presented a significant tactical challenge. While German fighters could sometimes outclimb or outturn the Thunderbolt at certain altitudes, they found it difficult to disengage from a determined P-47 in a dive. The aircraft's robust airframe was engineered to withstand these stresses, allowing pilots to exploit gravity in combat. This combination of durability, heavy armament, and diving speed forced a re-evaluation among German fighter pilots. They learned to respect the Thunderbolt's ability to absorb punishment and its formidable offensive punch, particularly when caught in its firing solution. The initial disdain evolved into a grudging acknowledgement of a tough, effective opponent that, despite its perceived lack of grace, proved exceptionally difficult to destroy. The P-47 Thunderbolt, initially dismissed by many Luftwaffe pilots as an ungainly, heavy fighter, ultimately carved out a formidable reputation, a testament to its robust engineering and concentrated firepower. German pilot debriefings from late 1944 and early 1945, compiled in Allied intelligence reports, show a marked shift in perception, acknowledging the aircraft's resilience, even when damaged. The early derisive moniker, Flying Brick, gave way to grudging respect, particularly as pilots encountered its sustained offensive capability. Its sheer mass, once a perceived liability, proved to be an asset in diving attacks and absorbing battle damage. Post-mission maintenance logs from USAAF airfields frequently documented P-47s returning with significant structural damage, wings riddled with 20mm cannon holes, fuselages perforated by machine gun fire, yet still capable of safe landing. This inherent toughness, designed into its heavy airframe and robust radial engine, allowed it to endure engagements that would cripple lighter, more fragile aircraft. The 850 caliber machine guns, firing at a combined rate exceeding 6,800 rounds per minute, became the decisive factor in many engagements. German loss reports from fighter units like JG-2 and JG-26, detailing engagements with P-47s, often cited the devastating effect of this concentrated fire. A single burst from a Thunderbolt could tear apart the airframe of a Messerschmitt Bf-109 or Focke-Wulf FW-190, often igniting fuel tanks or severing control surfaces with brutal efficiency. This firepower, combined with its ability to carry a significant bomb load, redefined its role from pure air superiority to a highly effective ground attack platform. The transition was not without internal debate within the USAAF, but the operational results, particularly during the Normandy campaign and the subsequent push across France, silenced many critics. Its capacity to absorb anti-aircraft fire while delivering precision ordnance made it invaluable for close air support. The P-47's operational statistics, recorded in USAAF historical summaries, reveal its impact. Over 1,500,000 combat sorties flown in the European theater of operations alone. This sustained presence, coupled with its lethality, forced the Luftwaffe to reassess its tactics and capabilities against an adversary it had initially underestimated. The psychological effect of facing an aircraft that could seemingly absorb punishment and still deliver a decisive blow was profound. The initial German assessment, rooted in the P-47's appearance and early combat reports, failed to grasp the strategic implications of its design philosophy. It was not built for elegant